Photo from my grandmother's 75th birthday is still on her mantle. I know because she told me so on the phone last spring. Everyone is in it. My parents, my brother, my aunts and uncles, all the cousins. My brother is front and center grinning that grin. I am not in it. Not because I wasn't there. I was there. I just got asked to step aside at the last second so the framing would look better. That was 12 years ago, and I still remember the exact feeling. Not hurt, exactly. More like confirmation. Like a door clicking shut that you'd always suspected was never really open for you anyway. My brother's name is Wesley. He's 3 years older than me, and from the time he was about 15, our family treated him like he was already a success story that just hadn't been published yet. He was going to do something great. Everyone could feel it, apparently. Our dad used to say it at the dinner table like it was just a fact. Wesley's got that thing, you know? That drive. And I would sit there eating my pasta and think, okay, sure, I want to be fair about this because fairness matters to me more than it probably should. Wesley isn't a bad person. He's charming, and he tells good stories, and he makes our mother laugh in a way that I never quite managed. I think she always found me a little too quiet, a little too serious. I read too much. I asked too many questions that didn't have easy answers. Wesley played hockey and shook hands and remembered everyone's names. Our family knew what to do with that. They didn't really know what to do with me. By the time I was in high school, the pattern was just the pattern. Wesley got a car for his 17th birthday. Not a new car, but a decent used one. A Civic that our dad spent a weekend cleaning up and putting new floor mats in. It was a whole thing. There were photos. I got a card on my 17th and a promise that we'd figure something out later. We never did. I started taking the bus, and I got very good at being on time. When Wesley wanted to go to university in Vancouver, our parents covered his first 2 years. Tuition, housing, the whole deal. He was studying business, which sounded impressive at family dinners, even though none of us could have told you exactly what he planned to do with it. When I got accepted to a program in Ottawa, a good program, one I'd worked hard to get into, my dad sat me down at the kitchen table and told me they'd help where they could, but things were tight. I nodded. I said I understood. I went back to my room and I applied for every bursary in Gran I could find, and I got a part-time job at a bookstore downtown, and I figured it out. I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me. I'm telling you so you understand what was normal for me. So you understand what I built myself around. Ottawa in winter is a specific kind of cold. The kind that gets into the gap between your scarf and your collar and just stays there. I was 20, living in a basement apartment with 2 other students, working Thursday through Sunday at the bookstore and Monday through Wednesday, keeping my head above water in class. I was tired in a way that felt permanent, but I was also, for the first time in my life, completely responsible for my own existence, and there was something clarifying about that. Nobody was going to do it for me. Nobody was going to do it for me. Nobody was watching. Nobody would notice if I failed, but nobody would take credit if I didn't. I didn't fail. I graduated with distinction. I got a job at a small tech firm doing data analysis. Nothing glamorous, just a lot of spreadsheets and pattern recognition, but I was good at it, and I got better. I moved into a better apartment. I started putting money into my RRSP and my TFSA because I had taken one personal finance course in my second year of university, and it had quietly changed my life. I was 24 years old, and I was maxing out my TFSA contributions, and nobody in my family knew because nobody in my family had ever thought to ask what I was doing with my money. Wesley, meanwhile, had graduated, moved back to Ontario, and started a landscaping business with money our parents lent him, $40,000. I found out at Thanksgiving. My dad mentioned it in passing, the way you mentioned something you've already processed and filed away. He seemed genuinely surprised that I didn't already know. I did the math on the drive home. $40,000 at the interest rate I was paying on my student loan over the repayment period I was on. I didn't say anything. I put on the radio. I drove. The business did okay for a while. Wesley had the charm for it. Clients liked him. He was reliable enough in the beginning, and the margins on landscaping and cottage country aren't bad if you know what you're doing. For a few years, it seemed like the family's faith in him was maybe going to be vindicated after all. And then the pandemic happened, and then Wesley made some decisions that I won't pretend to fully understand because I wasn't there and he didn't talk to me about them. What I know is that by the time I was 28, the business was struggling. My parents had lent him another $20,000, and Wesley was calling me for the first time in about 2 years, asking if I wanted to grab a beer sometime. I said sure. We grabbed a beer. It was fine. He didn't ask me for money, not that night. He just seemed smaller somehow. less certain. I had forgotten that he could look like that. We started talking more after that. Not deeply. Wesley and I have never really been deep with each other, but regularly. I knew things were hard for him. I didn't offer, and he didn't ask, and I think we were both okay with that arrangement. I need to tell you about the house now. My grandmother, my dad's mom, the one whose birthday photo I'm not in, owns a property about 2 hours north of Toronto. It's not grand. It's just a house on a lake, the kind of place that's been in the family long enough that everyone has feelings about it. She bought it with my grandfather in the 70s, and after he died, she kept it up herself for years, which is exactly the kind of thing she would do. She's not a sentimental person. She's practical and a bit sharp, and she has never once told me she was proud of me. But she also once drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to come to my university graduation without telling anyone she was coming, and she sat in the back and didn't say a word about it afterward. That's her. 3 years ago, she started talking about the property. What to do with it? She was in her early 80s, and she wasn't going up there as much as she used to, and she wanted things sorted. The family had a lot of opinions. My dad and his sister both felt they had some claim to it by virtue of being her children. Wesley started mentioning it at dinners. Casually, but often. He had ideas, he said. Could be a rental property. Could generate income. My grandmother called me in February of that year. It was a Tuesday night. She asked me how work was going, and I told her. And she asked a few specific questions about what I actually did, and what the company made, and what I thought the market was doing. And I answered them as honestly as I could. And then she was quiet for a moment, and she said, I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth. I said, okay. She said, do you have the money to buy this property? Not borrow from me, not a payment plan. Buy it. I thought about my TFSA. I thought about the investment account I'd been quietly growing for 6 years. I thought about the fact that I had never in my entire adult life bought anything I couldn't afford. I said, yes. She said, good. Then I'm selling it to you. Fair market value. I'll have David call you. David is her lawyer. I said, Gran. She said, you're the only one who will take care of it properly. The others would argue about it until it fell down. I've watched you your whole life, you know. I'm not blind. I didn't say anything for a second. She said, don't make it strange. Just take the call from David. I took the call from David. We sorted out the paperwork over about 6 weeks. My grandmother sold me the property at fair market value, which meant I got no special deal. She was firm about that. But I had the money, and I bought it, and I said nothing to anyone, because she asked me not to until she'd had a chance to speak to my dad and his sister herself. She told them in April. I know this because my dad called me approximately 40 minutes after she told him, and he was not yelling exactly, but he was using a voice I hadn't heard since I was 17 and had gotten a grade on a math test he didn't like. He said, you bought your grandmother's property. I said, yes. He said, without telling anyone. I said, Gran asked me not to tell anyone until she'd spoken to you. He said, Wesley had plans for that property. And I said, very calmly, because I had been waiting a long time to be calm in exactly this way, I know. But Gran had plans too, and they were her plans to make. He didn't have an answer for that. He hung up eventually. We didn't talk for about 3 weeks, which is longer than we'd gone before, but shorter than I was prepared for. The family reunion was my grandmother's idea, which is funny in retrospect because she's not generally a reunion kind of person, but she turned 83 this past summer, and she wanted to do something on the property. Maybe the last summer she felt like hosting, she said, and she invited everyone up for a long weekend in July. I drove up on the Friday. The property looks exactly like it always did from the road. Same gravel driveway, same dock, same ancient wooden porch chairs that need repainting every 2 years. But it's mine now, and I felt that as I parked. Something settled in my chest. Wesley was already there with his girlfriend. My parents had arrived that morning. My aunt and her husband came up Friday afternoon. By dinner, we were 12 people eating on the porch, and it felt almost normal, almost like every other summer, until my cousin, Wesley's age, not mine, always firmly in his camp, made a comment about the sale while we were doing dishes. He said it like that, the sale, the way you'd say the incident or the accident. He was talking to his wife, but he said it loud enough that I was meant to hear. Something about how some people always land on their feet. I kept drying the dish I was drying. I didn't say anything. I have had a lot of practice at this. Saturday was fine. We kayaked in the morning and someone made a big lunch, and in the afternoon, my grandmother sat in her chair on the porch and held court, the way she always does. And I sat near her and we talked about the interest rate environment, and she told me a story about a property she and my grandfather had almost bought in 1981 and decided against because the carrying costs were too high, and how she'd thought about that decision for years. I said, "Do you think you made the right call?" She said, "Of course not. It would have been worth 10 times what we paid for it, but we couldn't afford the risk then, so we didn't take it." That's not failure. That's just where you are. She looked out at the lake. The point is to know where you are. Wesley came out at some point and pulled up a chair and joined the conversation, and he was good at it. He's always been good at it. And for a while, it was just the three of us talking, and it felt almost like something a family could be. Then my aunt came out with a bottle of wine, and the conversation shifted, and Wesley started talking about the property, about what he'd been thinking, back when he'd had plans. He was doing it lightly, as a story, but there was something underneath it that I recognized. He was making a case. He was explaining, for the benefit of anyone listening, what could have been done here, what opportunities existed. My grandmother listened. She let him finish. Then she said, "Yes." And Simone bought it. "So that's what's happening. That's my name. Simone." She said it the same way she says everything. Just a fact, clean and complete. Wesley nodded and took a sip of his wine and didn't say anything else about it. Later, I went down to the dock by myself, and I sat there for a while. The lake was still, and the light was going pink at the edges, and somewhere across the water a loon was doing that thing loons do, that long, wavering call. It occurred to me that I had been waiting, some part of me, for a moment that felt like justice. And sitting there, I realized the moment had already happened, and I'd almost missed it because it wasn't dramatic. My grandmother just said my name. Simone bought it. 4 words. In 30 years of being the one who stepped out of the frame. That night, my dad and I ended up on the porch after everyone else had gone to bed. He had a beer, I had tea, the bugs were doing their thing against the porch light. We sat for a while without saying much, which is something we've always been able to do, even when other things were hard. Eventually, he said, "I didn't know you had that kind of money saved." I said, "You never asked." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "No, I suppose I didn't." He didn't say he was sorry. That's not really how he is. But something shifted in the way he was sitting. Something went out of his shoulders, and he said, "She's right, that you'll look after it properly." And he said it like it cost him something, which I think meant it was true. I said, "I know you would have too." He said, "Wesley would have turned it into something and lost it in 5 years." I didn't agree out loud. I didn't have to. I want to tell you what I've done with the property so far because I think this matters. I did not turn it into a short-term rental. I did not flip it. I repainted the porch chairs, dark green, they look good. And I replaced the dot boards that had been rotting for at least a decade. And I've been up there 6 weekends since I bought it. I took 2 friends up in September, and we made a big pot of chili and played cards and watched the northern lights come out just a little past midnight. My grandmother called me after that trip. She asked how it had gone. I said, "The dock is solid now, and the chairs are green." She said, "Good. Your grandfather always wanted green." She didn't know that I'd chosen green. It was just what felt right. There are things I still think about. The $40,000. The car on Wesley's 17th birthday. The way my dad's face looked at family dinners when Wesley was talking, present and interested and slightly lit up. And the way it looked when I was talking, which was fine. Attentive enough, but different. I'm not going to tell you I've made my peace with all of it, because that would be a lie, and I think you'd know it was. What I will tell you is this. Somewhere around 22, I decided that I was going to build something regardless. Not to prove anything. Not to rub anyone's face in it later. Just because I was there, and I had some ability, and the alternative was to stop and wait for someone to care, and I didn't think that was coming. The property is mine. Not because someone handed it to me. Because someone looked at me, finally, clearly, and saw that I was the one who would show up. And I had been showing up for years before that, quietly, without an audience, because that's what you do when nobody's watching. You show up, you do the work, you let the lake be still. And sometimes, on a Saturday in July, when the light is going pink and the loon is calling across the water, you realize that the frame got wider when you weren't looking. And this time, you're in it. If you've ever been the one who stepped aside, at a photo, at a table, in a conversation, in your own family's idea of who mattered, I want you to know that I see you. Leave me a comment. Tell me where you are now. I read every one. I've thought a lot about what made the difference. Not the TFSA, not the spreadsheets, not even the property itself. Those are just the visible parts, the part of the iceberg people can see once the water gets shallow enough. What made the difference was a decision I made somewhere around 22 that I didn't fully understand at the time. I decided to stop waiting for the room to turn toward me. I had been waiting my whole life, waiting to be seen at the dinner table, waiting for my parents to ask what I was doing with my money, waiting for someone to notice that I showed up on time, every time, without being reminded. That waiting had become such a habit that I barely recognized it as a choice. But it was. And at some point, I chose differently. I'm not going to tell you it felt heroic. It felt lonely, mostly. It felt like eating dinner in a basement apartment in Ottawa in February while my student loan interest ticked upward. It felt like watching my brother get celebrated for potential while I was out here doing the actual work of becoming something. There's a particular kind of quiet that comes with being underestimated for long enough. It's not peaceful. It's just what's left when you stop expecting applause. But here's what I've come to understand. The way people treat you tells you something true about them, and the way you respond tells you something true about yourself. My parents weren't cruel. Wesley isn't a villain. They all just had a story about who we each were, and they stopped updating it somewhere around the time I was 17 and taking the bus. That's a failure of attention, not of love. The two things are different, and it took me a long time to separate them. What I chose to do with that, and it was a choice, every single day, was to let it be information rather than instruction. I didn't build my savings account to prove something to my father. I built it because I understood, early and clearly, that nobody else was going to build it for me. I didn't buy the lake house to take something from Wesley. I bought it because Gran asked me a direct question, I gave her an honest answer, and she made a decision based on what she actually knew about both of us. That's the part that stays with me. She had been watching. She said so herself. I've watched you your whole life, you know. I'm not blind. She just hadn't said it out loud until it mattered. And by then, I had built something worth watching. I think about Wesley sometimes, and I don't feel what I expected to feel. I thought I'd feel vindicated. Mostly I just feel tired on his behalf. He had every advantage, and he's still carrying the weight of what he was supposed to become. That's not nothing. The golden child has its own kind of trap. The thing I want to say. The thing I'd want someone to have said to me at 22. Eating pasta alone and trying to figure out if the RRSP contribution room rolled over annually. Is this. Integrity is not a strategy. You don't build it to win something. You build it because it's the only foundation that holds. Every shortcut my family took on my behalf, every time they handed Wesley something instead of letting him earn it, those weren't gifts. They were debts he didn't know he was taking on. I repainted the porch chairs green. I didn't know my grandfather had always wanted green. I just chose it because it felt right. That's what happens when you pay attention long enough. Eventually, your instincts start telling you true things, and you trust them. And sometimes it turns out you've been carrying something forward without knowing it. Gran said, that's what's happening. 4 words. And the lake went quiet, and the porch light buzzed, and I understood that some reckonings don't arrive with noise. They just arrive